Hey, Brad, we the release that we talked about last week with Nick Saban, we finally get the release that he wants us to have, and it was lengthy. That's why I was a couple of minutes late getting to you. We've got all these announcements in one big, gigantic press release.
Not really. I'm not that familiar with him. I know that he had a connection with Saban from way back at Toledo, wasn't it? Yeah, I mean, aside from knowing that Miami's defense has played really well the last couple of years, I don't really have much to add to whatever you might already know about it.
Well, and to be honest with you, the first time I heard the name, I had to go Google it. I had to go, oh, okay. And then you certainly realize that he's a respected coach. He's got first-round talent. But I think the deeper inside of this is something that you and I texted about just briefly last night, is Nick Saban has changed over 50% of his coaching staff. He was not happy with recruiting, and how Nick Saban has built this dynasty is he beats you with having more talent and not out-scheming you. He beats you because he's got the Jimmies and Joes, not the X's and O's.
Yeah, it's funny because, over the years, and I'm sure you've gotten into it on your show, there's all this discussion about bye weeks and these teams that have a bye week before they play Alabama. And I'm not going to dispute that there's value in having a bye week as you get ready for an opponent. But I've heard other people suggest that with Alabama, it might be more valuable to have the week off after the game to kind of recover from your injuries. It's not like you benefit greatly from having an extra week to prepare because you know what they're going to do. I mean, Alabama's never been that secretive about their schemes. It's just, do you have the manpower to stop them from doing what they want to do? And I think you're right, which is that's what this run is predicated on. It's having superior talent, not, having superior X's and O's. That's not to say the X's and O's aren't good or aren't even very good. But certainly when you have the type of turnover at the coordinators that Saban has had over the last 10, 11 years, you can't have your foundation of your program be scheme and be X's and O's, especially with the turnover at offensive coordinator, considering that Saban himself has a defensive background. You can't be relying on the offensive play caller to give you that edge, and that's never been, like I said, the foundation for their success. And it is talent, and that comes from recruiting. And so, yeah, I didn't think that Saban would just sit idly. I think most of us kind of saw this coming after the early signing period when you knew that they weren't going to finish number one again. We didn't know whether they'd be able to pull out a great first week of February and end up with another top three class, but that didn't happen. And obviously, Saban has to make an adjustment as he's done so many times on the field up to this point in order to keep this machine going.
Well, you've played your audio clip from last week, and it's something that you gave us that I spent a lot of time thinking about. And you pointed this out with not signing anybody from Georgia, not signing anybody from Mississippi, and only two players here from the state of Alabama. They did not get the number one player in the state. Those are crushing signs to Nick Saban, who has that amazing foresight to go, hey, we've got to stop the bleeding.
Yeah, was it two from Alabama?
Well, okay,
I said.
No, but it was. But see, here's the thing, though. They had a guy that they were going to do a gray shirt or a blue shirt, and they brought him on board because they couldn't fill the numbers. So they brought him on late in the day. Like it was 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening where they called him and said, hey, we're not going to fulfill our numbers. Instead of blue shirt and gray shirt, and we're just going to bring in this class. So that was how that number got added. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you're right, though, in terms of the targets that were highest on their board, the ones that they did manage to land were, almost exclusively more than 250 miles from campus. And as I told you a week or two ago, whenever that was, you can't sustain success that way. Alabama's been, fortunate to have been able to parlay all their success on the field into a greatly expanded recruiting reach over the years, and have gotten a lot of, really important players from well away from the campus. But I don't think you could ever sustain the type of success they've had if you were needing to go that far away from home to get all your players. I mean, look, that's something we talk about all the time with a program like Nebraska. which used to be so dominant, and now they've fallen on hard times. And one of the reasons is that they can't get great talent. They can't get championship level talent from within a 250-mile radius of their campus. They have no choice but to go that far away. And it's more difficult to do that because the players you're recruiting, most of them don't have any loyalty to you because they didn't grow up a fan of your school. And so you might be able to get away with it for a class or two, but I think that the general core of your class typically needs to be not necessarily in state, but at least in the region. And that's something you can sustain. And I'd be really surprised if we don't see Alabama signing a lot more what we would call Southern players in the next signing class.
Well, I was just looking at the numbers, looking at the top 25 players in the state of Alabama. Alabama signed one of those guys. So that's, you know, and everybody's coming into your state, including Texas A&M, including Clemson, including guys like Malik Langum from Huntsville, went to Florida. Auburn raked up in the state of Alabama. Even Stanford came in and signed 2 players in the top 15 in this state. So you kind of back up and you go, man, that kind of stings a little bit here in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, and I don't know that not yet. And look, I mean, you know, 1 or 2 is certainly a small number of in-state guys for a class, but I don't know that necessarily would have stung if they got the usual haul out of Georgia. But I think that because of what you're seeing Kirby do, and I mean, just with the knowledge that 1, he's an excellent recruiter, and 2, that he has a program that has had success, and he can sell that on. He's not just selling hope anymore. I mean, Kirby Smart can sell a chance to win championships, and so I think that you have to accept the fact that that being able to go get a top 10 player out of the state of Georgia is not going to be as easy as it used to be. And it's not to say that you completely abandon Georgia. They've had way too much success getting guys out of there to do that, and there are way too many good players to go around for them to do that. But you do have to kind of, you know, set your sights more on Georgia, more on Mississippi. I know they've had a lot of success out of Louisiana during the time that Saban's been there, and they certainly, you know, have to keep pulling guys out of there. So it's not like they've got to, you know, drastically change what they've been doing. I think it just turned out to be a year where a lot of the guys who were in that region that they went for didn't go for them, and maybe that's an aberration. There could be something deeper to it, but I'm not at the point now where I would try to read that into it. I would just say it was a year where they just, you know, happened to miss on a lot of the higher profile guys they went after for probably various reasons. But it definitely is something that Saban seems to have addressed with the changes to the coaching staff, and we'll see if it you know plays out that way. But after, I guess, just knowing his track record, Ryan, I would be surprised, and I'm sure you would be too, if they are not back in the top 3 next year in recruiting. And I'm almost expecting them to be number 1, just, you know, with the knowledge of how they tend to bounce back after disappointments. I mean, you look on the field. I was looking at this after the season had ended. I was looking at you know everything they've done over the last 10 years, and saw that they have lost 1 national championship game, came back the following year and won the national title. They lost 1 national semifinal game, came back the following year and won not only another semifinal, but they won the national title. They lost 1 SEC championship game, came back the next year, not only won the SEC championship that year, but won the national title. So it's like every time that they have had a huge disappointment, they've rebounded in championship fashion, and I would expect that recruiting is not going to be any different.
How funny is it that we're talking about rebounding when Alabama just won the national title, right? I mean, Alabama won.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, and think about it. I mean, we're sitting here talking about, but to me, that's what you do when you try to fight complacency of not becoming stagnant.
Well, look, and it's also the fact that we're talking about rebounding from a number. I don't know where the other services rated this class. I just know ESPN is the one I pay attention to, and I think we had them 6th. But you're talking about rebounding from I mean, this is a class that most teams in the country would have died for. And yet it's a disappointment, just like the year before on the field, losing in the national championship game on basically the final play was a disappointment, a huge disappointment. And that's just where the bar is set. Is the expectation is to be number one in everything they do, whether that's on the field or off the field. And look, it's having expectations that high is what allows you to have the success that they've had. You could win some without expecting that much of yourself, but there's no way you could sustain it to this level if you didn't have those expectations, and that's what's made them great. And like I said, we expect to see them bounce back from disappointment, even if what's disappointing to them would have been worth celebrating for most programs in the country.
We are talking to Brad Edwards, ESPN college football insider, analyst for College Game Day on ESPN Radio that you hear right here on Tide 102.9. He's also part of his responsibility there at ESPN is he's part of the ESPN Stats and Information Group, is a research and analytic department that analyzes the data and looks at the models and looks at prediction. We talked about Football Power Index last week that's available on ESPN.com. But, Brad, I want to look back here. When you know what happens and you look after and you go back and try to analyze it, what's the biggest predictor of success when you look back at wins and the top-tier teams? What is the one common thing that they have in common?
Well, I mean, it kind of sounds cliche, but as much as we've seen this offensive explosion in college football in the last decade or maybe even more, it's still defense that wins championships, and that it's not defined the same way that it used to be, but in terms of defensive efficiency, I mean, you look down the national champions, and they are still teams that play great defense. I want to say that 2010 Auburn team is the only one in the last 15 years that was not a highly rated defense, and even with them, they had an elite player on their defense, Nick Fairley, who was probably the key to them being able to win that national championship game against Oregon. And then obviously they played great defense in that game, holding a great offense under 20. And so, I mean, as much as we might, get into all sorts of advanced metrics, I think it still comes back to that, which is that for all the points being scored, all the yards being gained, is that ultimately you got to be able to play defense to be able to win the whole thing. And that's something I think I had a lot of people skeptical of Oklahoma going into the playoff. It's like, as great as they were on offense, they were clearly the weakest defense of the four teams. And that just doesn't mesh with everything we know about football to pick the team with the weakest defense. And they came close, but wasn't enough. And so I think, to me, that's one of those constants with football until stuff starts happening to prove otherwise. I'm always gonna look for a team that let's not kid ourselves. These days, you need a good offense. You're not gonna win a national championship very often with a mediocre offense. But if you ask me which side is more important that you be really good at, it's the defensive side.
Well, how would you characterize Alabama's offense this past year?
Well, I think, and I'm not sure this is a whole lot different last year than it was the year before. I think really the last two seasons, you look at a team that had a whole lot of success when they physically overmatched an opponent. When they were able to win at the line of scrimmage and they were able to run the ball effectively, then they put up huge numbers on people. And because of that, the overall efficiency for the season was good. Now, when you isolate it to the games against the best defensive fronts they faced, it was pretty average. We obviously saw a change in the second half of the national championship game. Whether that's something that we can, expect to be consistent moving forward, I have no idea. But certainly at that moment, the change at quarterback and the change in offensive philosophy because of the change at quarterback helped Alabama. But from what I've seen the past 2 years, I would say that if Alabama can't throw the ball more effectively, and especially be able to throw the ball more effectively on, say, third and 4 yards or more, then they're going to have difficulty beating the best teams on their schedule unless they get a great defensive performance. And in a lot of these games that they've won that have been big games, that's what's happened in the last 2 years. The defense has played incredibly well, and the offense didn't have to do a ton. But I think we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years that even teams with really good defenses these days, they're going to come games where you can't realistically expect to hold a team under 10. That someone is going to be good enough offensively to be able to get 21, 24, something like that on you, and you're going to have to produce enough with your offense to outscore them. And so I think there's certainly signs, with the number of players, key players on offense that Alabama has coming back, that you would think that they could turn that corner. But yeah, that would be my takeaway from not just last year, but the last 2 years, that as a team overall, they have to get better at being able to convert at third and manageable. I mean, really anything other than third and short has really given them a lot of trouble over the last 2 seasons.
And is it balanced when you look at the offensive production? I mean, because is that a key to trying to predict wins?
No, I don't buy into balance the way that a lot of people do. I don't think it's important that you have close to a 50-50 rush-pass ratio. I think it's important that you keep the defense guessing. That you can go out. I mean, look at these teams that run the triple option, and of course you don't have many of them today like you used to. But I go back to like 95 Nebraska, for example. They won the national championship, and we remember what they did to Steve Spurrier's Florida team in that championship game. And I mean, that was a very talented defense that Florida had. And what it shows is that even against great competition, if you are physically superior and you can execute what it is you do, they can know you're going to run the ball. But as long as they don't know exactly where you're going to run the ball and which guy is going to have it, then it's difficult to stop. And that's where the balance comes in. So an offense of that nature can succeed as long as they're not predictable. And so I think in Alabama's case, you could still run the ball, 65% of the time. But as long as you're able to mix things up, and when you do throw, that it's not always. I mean, last year was kind of weird in that that Ridley was catching such a high percentage of their throws when they did throw. But if you're able to mix in throws not only to other wideouts but to the tight ends, to the backs, and then occasionally what also helps is if you can every now and then get a back down the field, not just passes behind the line to backs, but get one loose more than 10 yards downfield. Those are the types of things that can be really effective, and they make a defense think, and they keep them honest, even if you're not throwing on a high percentage of your plays.